The small town of Riverdale had always been a quiet place. It was the kind of town where everyone knew each other, where people left their doors unlocked, and where the biggest news was usually just who won the high school football game. For Jessica Chen, this was exactly what she needed, a calm place to start over with her father Thomas. Thomas Chen wasn't just any father. He had served in the Marines for 22 years. The walls of their modest two-bedroom house were covered with photos of him in uniform, standing tall and proud with his fellow soldiers. In those pictures, his eyes held a spark of life and determination. That spark was still there, but now those eyes couldn't see the world around him. "Dad, I brought you some fresh coffee," Jessica said one morning, carefully placing the mug into her father's outstretched hands. "2 sugars, just how you like it." Thomas smiled as his fingers wrapped around the warm mug. "You're too good to me, Jess," he said, taking a sip. "Perfect as always." Jessica watched her father with a mixture of love and concern. 3 years ago, during his final tour overseas, Thomas had been caught in an explosion. The doctors did everything they could, but they couldn't save his sight. The strong, independent man who had once led soldiers into battle now needed help with the simplest daily tasks. That's why Jessica had given up her apartment in the city and her job at a busy marketing firm. She had moved back to Riverdale, set up a home office in the spare bedroom, and started working as a freelance designer. The pay wasn't as good, but it allowed her to be there for her father. Mrs. Wilson from next door brought over some apple pie, Jessica said, sitting down across from her father at their small kitchen table. She says her grandson just got accepted to college. First one in their family. Thomas nodded, his face lighting up. "That's Bobby's boy, right? Good kid. Always helped me with the yard work before." He trailed off, gesturing vaguely toward his eyes. Jessica reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "He still asks about you. Lots of people do. You made quite an impression on this town before you left." It was true. Before joining the Marines, Thomas had coached the local youth baseball team for years. He had organized food drives during the holidays and helped rebuild the community center after a bad storm. Even now, people often stopped Jessica in the grocery store to ask how he was doing or to share stories about how he had helped them years ago. "We should have them over for dinner sometime," Thomas suggested. "I may not be able to see them, but I'd love to catch up." Jessica smiled. Her father never let his disability define him. He was learning to read Braille faster than his instructors had expected. He had set up a workshop in the garage where he crafted beautiful wooden boxes by feel alone. And every morning, no matter the weather, he walked around the block with his cane, determined to stay independent. Later that afternoon, as Jessica worked on a design project, she heard her father in the backyard. He was sitting on their old porch swing, playing his guitar. It was another thing he had relearned after losing his sight. The soft, gentle melody drifted through the open window as the spring breeze carried it across their small yard. Life wasn't perfect, but they were making it work. Jessica had found a rhythm in caring for her father while building her freelance business. Thomas had found new ways to enjoy his life despite the darkness. Their little house at the edge of Maple Street had become a peaceful haven for both of them. Neither of them could have guessed that their quiet life was about to be turned upside down. They couldn't have known that the abandoned auto shop just 2 blocks away was about to get new owners. Owners who would bring noise, trouble, and fear to their peaceful neighborhood. Owners who rode motorcycles with leather jackets bearing the emblem of a group known as the Devil's Hand. It started on a Tuesday morning. Jessica was working on a logo design for a new client when she heard it, the rumble of motorcycle engines, so loud that the windows seemed to shake. She looked out to see 5 motorcycles pulling up to the old Peterson auto shop that had been empty for years. "What's all that noise?" Thomas called from the living room, his head tilted toward the window. Jessica watched as men in leather jackets unloaded boxes from a truck parked behind the motorcycles. "Looks like someone's finally moving into the old auto shop," she said, trying to sound casual. But something about the men made her uneasy. Maybe it was the skull logo on their jackets, or the way they scanned the neighborhood as if taking mental notes. By the end of the week, everyone in Riverdale knew about the Devil's Hand Motorcycle Club. The abandoned auto shop had been transformed almost overnight. A large sign hung above the entrance, featuring a fist gripping what looked like flames. The windows were covered with dark tint, and motorcycles lined the front of the building at all hours. "They've been going back and forth all night," Mrs. Wilson complained when she came over for coffee. "I haven't slept properly in days, and I've seen strange cars pulling up at 2 or 3 in the morning. What kind of business are they running?" Thomas sat quietly, listening. Jessica knew her father could hear things others couldn't. Since losing his sight, his other senses had sharpened. "They're not just making noise," he finally said. "They're making a statement. They want everyone to know they're here." He was right. The devil's hand wasn't trying to fit into the community, they were challenging it. The first real problem happened when Jessica was helping her father practice walking to the corner store. They had made this trip 100 times. Thomas knew exactly how many steps to take, where the sidewalk dipped, and when to turn. But today, 3 motorcycles rode past them so close that Jessica could feel the wind from their passing. Thomas stumbled, his cane slipping from his grip as he tried to steady himself against the unexpected noise. Jessica caught him just before he fell. "Hey, watch it!" She shouted at the bikers, but they were already turning the corner, the sound of their laughter mixing with the thunder of their engines. An older man who had been tending his garden across the street hurried over. "You folks all right? These new people have no respect." He helped Jessica pick up her father's cane. "Someone should talk to them." "We're fine," Thomas said firmly, though Jessica could feel his hand trembling slightly as he gripped her arm. "Let's keep going, Jess." But the walk to the store, which had once been a point of pride for Thomas, now became an exercise in anxiety. Every time a motorcycle engine revved in the distance, he tensed up. Jessica watched her father's confidence, something he had worked so hard to rebuild after his injury, begin to crumble. It wasn't just them. The whole neighborhood was changing. Children who used to play in front yards were now kept inside. Elderly neighbors no longer sat on their porches in the evenings. The community center canceled its night classes after attendees reported being harassed in the parking lot. At night, the noise was worst. Music blared from the clubhouse until early morning. Motorcycles came and went at all hours. For Thomas, whose world was built on sounds, it was especially disturbing. He began having nightmares, waking up disoriented and sweating. "It's like being back there," he told Jessica one night, his voice barely a whisper. She didn't need to ask where there was. She knew he meant the war. Jessica called the police twice, but they seemed reluctant to do anything. "Noise complaints aren't exactly a priority," one officer told her. "And technically, they haven't broken any laws we can prove." After 2 weeks of this, Jessica noticed a change in the neighborhood. People walked faster, heads down. Conversations were hushed. Even Mrs. Wilson stopped coming over for coffee. The message was clear. The devil's hand was marking their territory, and Riverdale, including Jessica and Thomas, was caught in the middle of something they didn't understand. But neither Jessica nor the rest of the town realized yet just how personal this conflict was about to become. Jessica had always believed in facing problems head-on. That's what her father had taught her. So after a particularly loud night that left Thomas pacing the hallway until dawn, she decided it was time to talk to the bikers directly. "Dad, I'm going to stop by the auto shop on my way to pick up groceries," she told him over breakfast. Thomas set down his toast. "Jess, I don't think that's a good idea." "Someone has to say something," she insisted. "I'll be polite. Maybe they don't realize how the noise affects people like you." Thomas reached across the table, finding her hand with surprising accuracy. "These aren't people who respond well to polite requests," he warned. "I've known men like them. They see politeness as weakness." But Jessica's mind was made up. That afternoon, she parked her old blue sedan across from the Devil's Hand clubhouse. Taking a deep breath, she crossed the street and approached the building. Music thumped from inside, and the smell of cigarettes hung in the air. A tall man with a beard was working on a motorcycle out front. He looked up as Jessica approached, his eyes narrowing. "Can I help you?" he asked, wiping his hands on a rag. Jessica introduced herself and explained about her father, how he was a veteran, how he had lost his sight serving their country, how the constant noise was affecting his health. She kept her voice steady and respectful. "We're not asking for much," she finished. "Just maybe keep the volume down after 10 p.m. And maybe not rev the engines so much when you pass our street." The man listened without interrupting. When Jessica finished, he nodded slowly. "That's a real touching story," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "But here's the thing, sweetheart, we bought this place fair and square. What we do here is our business." "I understand that," Jessica replied. "I'm just asking for a little consideration." "Pete," the man called over his shoulder, "come hear this." A door opened and another man stepped out, followed by 3 others. All wore the same leather jackets with the devil's hand emblem. "This lady wants us to be quiet so her daddy can sleep better," the first man explained, prompting chuckles from the others. The one called Pete, clearly a leader of some sort, stepped forward. He wasn't as tall as the first man, but something in his eyes made Jessica take a step back. "You live in the White House on Maple, right, with the ramp?" Pete asked. Jessica felt a chill run down her spine. They had noticed their house. They had paid attention to the wheelchair ramp they'd installed for days when Thomas's balance was bad. "Look," she said firmly, "I just wanted to talk neighbor to neighbor. That's all." Pete smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Message received, neighbor. We'll take it under advisement." As Jessica walked back to her car, she heard them laughing behind her. She knew she had made a mistake. That night was quieter, strangely enough. But the next morning, Jessica found a note tucked under her windshield wiper. It read simply, "Mind your own business." She crumpled it up before Thomas could ask what it was. Over the next few days, Jessica noticed a change. Whenever she left the house, a motorcycle would often appear, following her at a distance. When she went to the grocery store, she'd spot one of the Devil's Hand members watching her from across the parking lot. Once, when she was working late, headlights shone through her window for nearly an hour before driving away. Thomas noticed her tension. "What's going on, Jess? You're jumping at every sound." "It's nothing," she lied, "just stressed about work." But it was becoming impossible to hide the truth, especially when Jessica stepped outside one morning to find all 4 tires on her car slashed. Officer Reynolds from the local police came out to take a report, but his response wasn't encouraging. "Could have been anyone," he said with a shrug. "No cameras around here to prove who did it." "It was them," Jessica insisted. "You know it was." Reynolds looked uncomfortable. "Look, Ms. Chen, my advice? Don't rock the boat with these guys. They have connections you wouldn't believe." "Connections? In Riverdale?" Jessica couldn't hide her disbelief. The officer wouldn't meet her eyes. "All I'm saying is, sometimes it's better to just stay quiet and wait for people to move on." As he left, Jessica realized with a sinking feeling that they couldn't count on the police for help. When she went back inside, she found Thomas sitting perfectly still in his armchair, his unseeing eyes fixed straight ahead. "Dad?" she asked. "I heard everything," he said quietly. "And I heard what he didn't say. We're on our own, aren't we?" Jessica couldn't bring herself to lie to him again. "Yes," she admitted. "I think we are." Jessica couldn't afford to replace all 4 tires at once. Their savings were already stretched thin with Thomas's medical bills. Luckily, her neighbor Mr. Garcia offered to drive her to work until she could get at least 2 tires replaced. "Don't worry about paying me back," he said when she tried to give him gas money. "Your dad helped my son get into the military academy years ago. We don't forget things like that." It was a small comfort during a difficult time. The harassment from the Devil's Hand continued in little ways. Sometimes it was just a motorcycle circling their block repeatedly at night. Other times, Jessica would find trash dumped on their lawn. Once, someone called a pizza delivery to their house at 3 a.m., 20 pizzas that they hadn't ordered and couldn't pay for. Thomas tried to keep his spirits up, but Jessica could tell the situation was wearing him down. His nightmares got worse. During the day, he would sit for hours just listening, tensing at every unfamiliar sound. "I feel useless," he admitted one evening. "Before, I could have protected you." "You're not useless," Jessica insisted, "and I don't need protecting. We just need to stick it out until they get bored and move on." But deep down, she wasn't sure they would move on. The bikers seemed to enjoy tormenting them. After 2 weeks of harassment, Jessica scraped together enough money to get her car running again. That first day with her car back, she went grocery shopping, feeling a small sense of independence returning. As she loaded bags into her trunk, she noticed a familiar leather jacket in the corner of the parking lot. One of the Devil's Hand members was watching her. Jessica drove home carefully, checking her rearview mirror the whole way. That night, she made Thomas's favorite dinner, pot roast with carrots and potatoes, hoping to lift both their spirits. As they ate, Thomas seemed unusually quiet. "Something on your mind, Dad?" Jessica asked. He set down his fork. "I've been thinking about my old military buddies. Some of them might be able to help us." Jessica shook her head before remembering he couldn't see the gesture. "Dad, I don't want to drag anyone else into this mess. We'll figure it out." "Maybe," he said, but he didn't sound convinced. The next morning, Jessica went out to her car only to find something much worse than slashed tires. The hood was open. Someone had been tampering with the engine. Heart pounding, she called the local mechanic, who came over to take a look. Bill Townsend had been fixing cars in Riverdale for 30 years. He examined Jessica's car with a grim expression. "Someone cut your brake line," he told her quietly. "If you had driven this down that steep hill by the grocery store." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Jessica felt like the ground was tilting beneath her feet. This wasn't just harassment anymore. Someone had deliberately tried to hurt her, or worse. When she told Thomas what had happened, he went very still. "That's it," he said, his voice harder than she'd heard it in years. "This ends now." That evening, they were sitting down to dinner when they heard it, motorcycles, at least a dozen of them, circling their block. Then the engines cut off right in front of their house. Jessica peeked through the curtains. "There are about 15 of them out there," she whispered. "They're just standing around their bikes, watching the house." Thomas stood up, reaching for his cane. "Let me talk to them." "Dad, no." Jessica grabbed his arm. "That's exactly what they want. They're trying to scare us into doing something stupid." "So what do we do?" Thomas asked. Before Jessica could answer, someone outside revved an engine so loudly that the windows rattled. Then came the sound of something shattering, a rock through their front window, glass spraying across the living room floor. "Stay down," Jessica cried, pulling her father to the floor as more rocks hit the house. Thomas's face had gone pale, his hands shaking. The noise, the chaos, it was triggering memories of the explosion that had taken his sight. He was breathing too fast, disoriented. "Dad, stay with me," Jessica pleaded, holding his hands. "Focus on my voice." But Thomas was somewhere else now, lost in the sensory overload that transported him back to the worst day of his life. As Jessica tried to calm him, his foot caught the edge of the coffee table. He fell hard, hitting his head on the corner of the fireplace. "Dad." Jessica pressed a dish towel to the cut on his forehead, watching blood seep through the fabric. Outside, the bikers continued their intimidation, unaware or uncaring about the harm they were causing. In that moment, something changed in Jessica. The fear that had been building for weeks transformed into something else: determination, anger, resolve. These people had threatened her, terrorized her father, and turned their home into a place of fear rather than safety. As she held the towel to her father's head, she made a decision. There was one option they hadn't tried, one call she could make. With shaking hands, Jessica helped her father to the couch. The cut on his head wasn't deep, but it had already formed a bruise. Outside, the noise of the bikers had faded. They'd made their point and left, probably laughing all the way back to their clubhouse. "I'm calling an ambulance," Jessica said, reaching for her phone. Thomas caught her wrist. "No need. I've had worse scratches shaving." He tried to smile, but winced instead. "But I think it's time we call in some help." "The police won't do anything." "We already tried that," Jessica reminded him. "Not the police," Thomas said. He took a deep breath. "In my bedroom, top drawer of my dresser. There's an old address book. Bring it here." Jessica found the worn leather book easily. Its pages were creased and yellowed with age. Thomas had kept it for years, even though he could no longer read the entries himself. "Look under it," he instructed. "Look for Hank Johnson." Jessica flipped through the pages. "Got it. There's a number here, but Dad, this book is ancient. This number is probably disconnected by now." "Try it anyway," Thomas insisted. "Put it on speaker." Jessica dialed the number, expecting to hear the familiar tone of a disconnected line. Instead, after 3 rings, a gruff voice answered. "Yeah." Jessica was so surprised she almost dropped the phone. Is this Hank Johnson?" "Who's asking?" The voice was cautious, suspicious. "My name is Jessica Chen. I'm Thomas Chen's daughter. He served with you in. Tommy? The voice interrupted, suddenly warmer. Tommy Chen? The piano man? Thomas smiled at the nickname. It's me, Hank. Been a long time. Holy cow, it's really you. Have you been, brother? Last I heard you were in pretty rough shape. I've been better, Thomas admitted. That's actually why I'm calling. My daughter and we've got a situation here. For the next 10 minutes, Thomas explained everything that had been happening with the Devil's Hand Motorcycle Club. Jessica was surprised by how clearly he laid it all out. He'd been paying more attention than she realized. Hank listened without interrupting. When Thomas finished, there was a long silence. You said they call themselves the Devil's Hand? Hank finally asked. That's right, Jessica confirmed. Do you know them? I know of them, Hank said, his voice tight. They've caused trouble in other towns before moving to yours. They're not just a motorcycle club. They're into all sorts of bad business. We don't know what to do, Thomas admitted. The police here won't help. We're trapped in our own home. Another silence fell. Jessica could hear the sound of Hank tapping something, maybe a pen against a desk. Tommy, remember Kabul? Remember what you did for my unit there? I just did what anyone would do, Thomas said, his voice dropping. No, you didn't, Hank replied firmly. You risked your life to get us out when we were pinned down. You lost your eyes saving us. He paused. I never forgot that. None of us did. Jessica looked at her father in surprise. Thomas had never shared much about how he was injured. Where exactly are you located? Hank asked. Jessica gave him their address in Riverdale. All right, here's what's going to happen, Hank said, his voice taking on a commanding tone that Jessica imagined he used during his military days. You two sit tight. Don't provoke these guys. Stay inside as much as possible. I need to make some calls, but help is coming. What kind of help? Jessica asked. The kind these Devil's Hand boys won't see coming, Hank replied. Tommy, you remember the old saying from our unit? Thomas nodded, a small smile forming on his face. Who stands alone falls alone. That's right, Hank said. And brother, you were not standing alone. Not anymore. After they hung up, Jessica looked at her father. Dad, who exactly is Hank Johnson? Thomas leaned back on the couch, looking more relaxed than he had in weeks. Hank was my commanding officer for my last 2 tours. After the military, he started something called the Veterans Motorcycle Association. It's a group of former military personnel who still ride together. Wait, Jessica said slowly. You're telling me your friend runs a motorcycle club? And you think they're going to help us against the Devil's Hand? Thomas nodded. Hank's not just any rider, and his club isn't just any club. These are men and women who serve their country, who know what it means to fight for something that matters. He reached out, finding Jessica's hand. And if Hank says he's coming, then he's coming. That's one thing you can count on. For the first time in weeks, Jessica felt a flicker of hope. She didn't know what help was coming or when it would arrive. But the absolute certainty in her father's voice was enough to make her believe that maybe, just maybe, things were about to change. 3 days passed with no word from Hank. Jessica began to wonder if they had placed their hopes in empty promises. The Devil's Hand seemed quieter, but she didn't trust the silence. It felt like the calm before a storm. On Thursday morning, Jessica was washing dishes when Thomas suddenly straightened in his chair. Do you hear that? He asked. At first, Jessica heard nothing. Then it reached her ears too, the distant rumble of motorcycles. Not just a few, but many. They're coming back, she said, her stomach nodding with fear. I'll lock the doors. Thomas shook his head. No, that's not them. The rhythm is different. More disciplined. Jessica went to the window and peered out. Her jaw dropped at what she saw coming down their street. Dad, she whispered. There must be 50 motorcycles heading this way. The riders came into view, men and women on motorcycles of all types and sizes. Unlike the Devil's Hand, who all wore nearly identical leather jackets, these riders showed more individuality. But they all shared one common patch on their backs, an eagle with outstretched wings above the letters VMA. Veterans Motorcycle Association, Thomas said, smiling as he recognized the rumble of the approaching bikes. Hank came through. The motorcycles lined up along both sides of the street in perfect formation. Neighbors peeked out of windows and stood on porches, watching in amazement as the disciplined group parked their bikes with military precision. A tall man with gray hair, pulled into a ponytail, removed his helmet and walked up to their door. Jessica opened it before he could knock. "You must be Jessica," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Hank." His handshake was firm, his eyes kind but determined. Behind him, the other riders stood at a respectful distance, forming a protective semicircle around the property. "Where's that old troublemaker?" Hank asked with a grin. Thomas appeared in the doorway, using his cane. "Hank Johnson, still making an entrance, I see." The two men embraced like brothers who had been separated for years, which Jessica realized they were. "Everyone, this is the man I told you about," Hank called out to the gathered riders. "Thomas Chen, the bravest piano player the Moraines ever had." A cheer went up from the group. Jessica noticed that many of them had visible scars or prosthetic limbs, wounds from their service, just like her father's blindness. Hank turned back to Thomas. "We've been gathering intelligence since your call. The Devil's Hand has quite a reputation. They've been pushed out of 3 towns before settling here." "They're dangerous," Jessica warned. "So are we," Hank replied simply. "But we do things differently." He gestured to a woman standing nearby. "Linda here is a lawyer. She's already filed complaints with the state about suspected activities at their clubhouse." The woman nodded. "We've also contacted some old friends in federal law enforcement. They've had their eye on this group for a while." Another rider stepped forward, a younger man with a prosthetic leg. "We've rented the house across the street. We'll be keeping watch in shifts until this is resolved." "You didn't have to do all this," Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion. "Yes, we did," Hank replied firmly. "Your family, and nobody messes with our family." As they talked, Jessica noticed 2 motorcycles slowing down at the end of the block, Devil's Hand members on a patrol. They stopped abruptly when they saw the gathering. Hank noticed them too. "Looks like we have company." The Devil's Hand riders revved their engines, perhaps trying to appear intimidating. In response, every single VNA rider turned to face them, standing at attention, not making a sound but presenting a united front. The message was clear. After a tense moment, the 2 Devil's Hand members turned around and sped away. "They'll be back," Hank said. "With more of them next time, but so will we." "What exactly is your plan?" Jessica asked. "First, we secure your home," Hank explained. "Some of our members will stay here, take shifts keeping watch. Meanwhile, we'll apply pressure, legal pressure, community pressure. These bullies only thrive when people are too scared to stand up to them." Thomas reached out, finding Hank's shoulder. "I don't know how to thank you." "You already did, brother," Hank replied. "Couple, remember?" As the VNA members began unloading supplies and setting up a perimeter around the house, Jessica felt tears in her eyes. For weeks, she had felt abandoned, alone in their struggle. Now, looking at these strangers who had come so far to help them, not strangers at all, but her father's extended family, she understood something important. The Devil's Hand had power through fear. But these veterans had something stronger. A bond forged through sacrifice and service. Thomas volunteered there 3 days a week, offering guidance to younger veterans struggling with their own physical and emotional wounds. His experience navigating life without sight gave him unique insights that even the counselors couldn't provide. Jessica found herself busier than ever, designing websites for veteran-owned businesses and creating materials for the Outreach Center. She'd gained not just safety but an extended family, one bound by something stronger than blood. "You know what I realized?" Thomas said one evening as they sat on their porch, listening to the peaceful sounds of their neighborhood. "Those bikers thought they were targeting us because of our weakness, my blindness, our isolation. They never understood that the connections we make in life, the people we help along the way, that's not weakness. That's our greatest strength." Jessica nodded, watching the sunset paint the sky over their small town that no longer felt small at all. What had begun as a nightmare had transformed their lives in ways she never could have imagined, reminding them both that no one ever fights alone, not when they've served others with an open heart.